gentlemen, welcome to the future. My name is Zach Gardner, the chief architect at Keyhole Software. And a few months ago, I set off on a little bit of a journey as I am the resident sojourner here at Keyhole Software. I wanted to go out and find people that were thinking about generative AI as much, if not more, than what I was doing. I scoured the internet. I went to every nook and cranny I could find, and I found some really interesting people, some of which I had actually heard speak at a recent AI KC event, which was like, it's a total coincidence. I have Mr. David Maples, the CEO of Catapult. How's it going, David?
Hey, I'm doing great, Zach. Glad to be on your show.
Good, good. As a
Uh,
reminder for all of our, sort of pedantic listeners, the views and opinions expressed in this program are the views and opinions of its participants and do not reflect their employers or any trade organizations they are associated with. This is just two people that have opinions. They're just chatting. This is just a chat. This is a fun time. So I guess to get us started off, David, for those that don't know you, haven't heard about you, give me your life story in a minute. Like where'd you go to college? Where do you live? Do you enjoy long walks on the beach, dogs or cats? How did you start Catapult? Just just give me what you got.
okay, so in a nutshell, in a minute, there's a lot there. I built my first computer when I was 12. Half the money I saved up and borrowed from my grandmother. And that kind of started my journey into coding and programming and everything else that's gone since. Went to University of Georgia for undergraduate. Went to law school at LSU. I am an intellectual property attorney. Um, and I've kind of focused a lot on copyright and trademark over the past 10 years doing that. Catapult Creative Media, I'm CEO of it, but my better half and my wife actually started that back when I was in law school, I guess 17, almost 17 years ago now. And so that's a digital marketing agency. We have a couple of other ventures. All of our software development and programming activities are in a separate company called Calray. We keep that separated so that people understand that that's focused on software development and programming and generative AI. And then Catapult gets to kind of benefit from all those things. Personally, we got involved in software as a company in 12, machine learning in 2018, and we really moved into generative AI, R and applications and things like that last January, February, I guess last year, end of January, beginning of February, partly because there was a gap in the market segment and in the market space. Secondarily, because a lot of the things being put out don't really serve our clients, et cetera. And we know that um, the future of generative AI is going to really change all industries, not just digital marketing, not just whatever you're in. I always say from daycare to dry cleaning to zookeepers, it's going to change everything. So kind of from that standpoint, we've been involved in that space. We built some pretty cool pieces of software along the way, some of which are out in the market segment right now. That's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm kind of on a journey right now of a lot of it's education. We're doing a lot with AI training of individuals and companies on how to integrate these systems into their things. And the biggest surprise to us is that most companies don't have a plan. The majority of companies, even Fortune 500s, only 17% are going to fully integrate supposedly AI into the workflows and systems this year. A lot of people are kicking that down the road to next year. And for us, that just seems a little surprising. Um, it just seems like that's something that should be like, kind of burning down the front door. And a lot of people are saying, we're going to wait till 2025. And right now, waiting in the generative AI space to start talking about putting it in your company, a year is like a decade. It's the fastest adoption of technology ever in human history, and arguably it will be the most important um, creation of humans. So there's a lot there, a lot to unpack. But that's kind of me in a nutshell, and what I've been, what's been keeping me awake at night lately.
Yeah, definitely. And the jury will note you did not answer dogs or cats, so we
Oh,
didn't
I'm
get
definitely a
into
cat
that.
person.
Oh, okay.
I'm definitely a
Um,
cat person. I do like dogs. Didn't really grow up with them a lot, but I like cats. I can let them go off and do their own thing. Um, you know, um, cats look down on us, dogs look up to us. What is it? Pigs see us as
yeah,
equals. Yeah.
I've never heard that one before. I enjoy that. I
Winston
like that.
Churchill.
He had a lot of good one-liners.
Yes, that's his
Yes.
thing. Like he was just the king of like one-liners.
Mhm.
Really interesting person historically.
Yeah, he had a stutter, some sort of speech impediment too, and he would have to just practice what he was going to say over and over and over and over again until it was just muscle memory.
Yeah.
So
It's
super super interesting
kind of
dude.
incredible.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say, what was it, dry, dry cleaning to daycare, because like
Hmm.
that really echoes what I've seen in terms of all these interviews that I've been doing.
Hmm.
I've talked to people in healthcare, in the defense sector, and pretty much everything. That you are, though, as far as I can think, you're the first lawyer that I've ever
Ah,
had on, the first attorney. So,
well,
you won the badge, your prize is in the mail.
got
I'm
it.
curious though, we'll dive into that maybe at the second half on the back nine, but on the front nine, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about more from the digital marketing and advertising angle. How have you seen AI help? Are there areas of it where you kind of are worried, or is it full steam ahead? You just gotta live the future. YOLO, as the kids say.
Okay. Um, there's so much there. Kind of in digital marketing space, I think what we're going to start to see is a real divide, a separation into the higher end digital marketing agencies to do stuff with kind of enterprise level clients, and we have a few of those. And then I think it's going to be kind of um, it's like going to be a mosh pit at the bottom of just a whole bunch of freelancers scrambling for whatever they can get. And they're going to be competing not only with each other, but with people who are doing DIY stuff using generative AI. Funny enough, um, AI is really not, I'm a big proponent of having humans in the loop. Um, I think the idea of AI agents, I mean, I still think we're years away from those actually being fully baked in to where you can trust them to a level um, to reach a level that where humans feel like they're confident with their activities and doing stuff on their own autonomously. I'm not real bullish on that at the moment. And then kind of from AI philosophers, I'm more in the John LeCun camp, kind of. I don't necessarily know the AGI that LLMs will lead to AGI. I just think they're going to be smarter and smarter simulacrums from what humans do, et cetera. At least that's what I've seen so far. That doesn't mean they're not incredibly powerful. On the digital marketing side, we're using it for a whole bunch of different things. Um, the challenge we're running into is that what people think they're good at and what they're actually good at are two very different things. So, for example, ending up on the internet. There's a whole bunch of synthetic content right now that's being generated by AI. And as a company, and this is not just because we have a vested interest in it. I'll play devil's advocate and I'll eat my own dog food on this. We actively write generative content for clients, right? Now we've used AI in the mix for years. And really until ChatGPT, it was kind of it was much ado about nothing. It was really the quality of the content you would get out from it wasn't that good. But now, you can ask it a topic and you'll get as good as what you'd get from a plucky college intern, at the entry level thing. That does not mean that that is ready for prime time content. You still have to have a human in the loop. So my people use it for everything from we've tried it. We've tried it, by the way. We tried replacing content, and we write pretty high level content. We've tried replacing our content team by generative AI. What will we get? And the problem with it is you get you're kind of pushing pixels around. You get more of the word mash kind of from other places online, assuming you get rid of the hallucination problem altogether, right? And that's the problem. When things get nuanced, the AIs do not, as of today, February 2024, when you get the nuance like legal issues, they will mix up issues and concepts a lot. If humans do it, they do it at a much higher level. And I don't know if I'd call that a fully baked hallucination, more as just a misunderstanding. And I can give a case point on that from just this week with doing legal stuff. So that being said, back to digital marketing, we're using it from everything from ideation. Strategy planning is kind of interesting. We're using it a lot in that kind of segment, et cetera. That's one of the harder things to teach your your rank and file employees, but the machines do an okay job on strategy based on certain inputs. So if you can get good inputs, feed them in the machine, you can get pretty good outputs. Um, it's completely revolutionized how we're doing sales, just literally how we're going after stuff on LinkedIn, email marketing, everything else as far as that goes. And we're currently building out education modules to teach companies how, because what we found is the appetite in the digital marketing space is so agencies all want us to give them stuff to make their jobs easier because the reality of it is a GPTs and GPT store. Um, we have built some stuff with our own pieces of software that are literally 5 to 7 times faster and give you better outcomes than you do going into the GP store and chat GPT. Now we're powered by GPT, but that workflow and stuff like that, people don't know where they're looking. So we've given them more controls over that. Um, that being said, in the digital marketing segment, if I know what to ask the machine, so if I say, here's a spreadsheet changed into CSV, and here are the columns, and here are the weights that I consider valuable in this, analyze the sheet according to this constraints, you get pretty good outcomes. Now, you got to have somebody who knows what they're doing and looking at the stuff. And I found that most digital marketers don't really do data. They just don't. They talk about it. And they talk about like, oh, I pulled a keyword research report from Google. But only about 5 or 10% of us, I think, in the market segment actually know what the data really means. And that's why we do enterprise level stuff. But that being said, is it a great tool? Yeah. I mean, we're using it for anything that's rudimentary, a lot of clerical stuff right now, as opposed to generating the actual content where we're saving real time on it is a lot of things that were just stuff that my people were not happy about doing in the first place. We are working with some generative AI. We are working with some AI agents on some of the stuff we do from deploying servers and things like that, like where they can follow commands and follow a particular set of. We're working with stuff. Um, I don't know if I'm liberty to say, but we're working on some stuff right now, kind of from that old World of Bits paper, if you know what I'm talking about, from way back. It's basically about artificial agents. I think literally, as far as like it knowing how to click and use your mouse and keyboard to do some rudimentary tasks that are you know that minutia stuff. I think they're really useful on that. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
You have
No,
a question?
no. Before you keep going, I just want to kind of circle back. There was a case study that you were talking about, I think, from this week for the difference between like a hallucination and a misunderstanding, which,
Yeah.
as a human, you're always the one that has to kind of tell the LLM, like, this is what I'm thinking. So if you're not super clear on what you're thinking, you know, I can definitely empathize that it would be a misunderstanding more than just like a technical
Well,
hallucination.
it dealt with a legal case where I'm dealing
Okay.
with stuff and without revealing what's going on. So I do copyright and trademark law stuff. And I shade into contract law because it just always seems to come up when I'm doing stuff. And um, the client was very obviously using generative AI stuff to help understand or parse the stuff I was feeding to them, right? And meanwhile, I'm being paid to do this stuff. And the client would reply like, "Oh, no, no, I understand all of these really complicated, deep things that you just fed me, and this and this." And what it was it dealt with a very nuanced portion of the law. Okay. And it deals with everything from like IRS revenue rulings to what is and is not allowed, etc. And it's a fact and circumstances test. And the reason I knew that it was GPT because it came back with these very competent things. I'm familiar with these things. And this is the thing. And what it was doing is it was conflating two words that have different meanings in the context of the law,
Mm-hmm.
and they give completely different outcomes. It reminds me
Mm-hmm.
of I'm going to go ahead and say this. Back when I was in law school, my worst grade in law school ever was criminal law. Worst grade I ever made in law school. Okay. And I really thought I was like going to be as legal, and whatever it was. And I went and saw Dr. Green was my professor. He had this weird voice that would always crack me. He'd be like, "Well, Mr. Maples, I read your read your thing." And I don't know if you know how law school essays work, but on the final exam, you get like the series of fact patterns, and it says find all the criminal activities in here and analyze it per. And it's this crazy fact pattern where somebody accidentally got drunk at a parade and walked into somebody's house and did this. And there's all these things like the mistake of law and everything else. And it's like, what crimes have been committed? The problem with my answer on this was that I missed something in step one. It would be like missing an arithmetic sign in a math problem, and a very complicated linear algebra equation that would take you 3 pages to answer, right? Whatever it is. But in step one, you miss this plus sign or whatever
Mm-hmm.
it was, and whatever it is. And so you end up with an outcome that's 45 billion, and the answer should be eight.
Yeah.
And what in this particular case was something very similar. And I thought about it. So in this law school exam, don't only did I digress and say that, I'd missed something very, very important in step one, which had to do with what's called the mens rea, or the active mind of the person committing the crime. And it completely invalidated everything else in my later arguments, right? And so I got a very, very bad grade. He's like, but it was a really brilliant analysis of whatever. Had you not missed this thing in step one, that would have been a good answer. As it was, you get the worst grade in the class. And I was kind of like partial credit, because I remember able to say my days in comp sci and programming and stuff. And I was like, what, can I get partial credit on that? Anyway, the point about this is that when I talk about the generative AI things and the use cases, the things that really worry me are when they look close to what an approximation of the right answer would be. Um, and that's where people begin, and they reinforce it. I ended up arguing with this particular client about this. I said, that's not the way the law works. No, no, no. I know this is how it works. What's your source? They were kind of quiet on that. They said, well, I've done some research. Okay. Just because you slept at a Holiday Inn last night does not.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that in a while.
And I was just, and I didn't say that because I sound really jerkish about it, but I'm not. So when I do this, you have to go back and look at the case law. You have to go look at the things, especially when it's nuanced. When it's a multifactorial test, for example, copyright for fair use defense, which we'll probably talk about in a minute, has four major factors. And whatsoever other factors the court may decide to apply. Someone says there's four factors in fair defense. No, there's actually an infinite number of fair use. Sorry, there's four factors. No, there's four factors, and anything else the court decides is material to the discussion. So what's really happened here is when those things are close, people will become very convinced, and this is where it's very dangerous because the argument they were making dealt with an entirely other side of the issue, not the issue at hand. The issue at hand is I'm trying to, as a lawyer, you're not allowed to say exactly what the case was, and I can't reveal who the client is. This is active going stuff right now, et cetera, right? Um, but it's like if we were talking about, um, I'm trying to come up with a good analogy for it. But it's literally like you're not even looking down the wrong, you're looking down the wrong corridor because you went the wrong way to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And so your analysis is completely wrong, and nothing you're saying is germane to the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think
I
that's
like
been
that.
one of my biggest concerns about generative AI. And also, I do have more of an existential crisis on. Um, so we we have deployed some LLMs. Okay, we deployed several. We have several running on a Llama 2, Llama 2 type stack because that has commercial use in this area. And we've done a whole bunch of fine tuning on that. Our chatbot things, we can fine tune those. We have a chatbot that we've released in the market space that we have out there to go on websites, etc. Um, but it requires a lot of fine tuning. If I'm training it on your own material, Zach, it requires a lot of fine tuning, and then you have to kind of red team it. You don't want to have a Chevrolet problem like they had in December. Tell me why Tesla is so much better than a Chevy, and it goes on for pages, right?
Oh, I
And
thought you were gonna bring up when there was I think it was a Chevy dealership where someone was using the chatbot, and I got the chatbot agree to sell them this truck for $0 and to say that this is a binding agreement. I hadn't heard about that one.
so, well, I know, I think it's a variant on the same case. Yeah, I
Okay.
think yeah, there's a variant on that. So, um, there's a question, and that's when I always talk about having human in the loop. Like, is it binding on you, right? If your people go out there, there's a question about there. Did you manipulate them into something, and did they agree to it, and are you held to it? It'll be really interesting to see the legal case on this, right? But um, I think there are limits to what we should be doing with these things, at least as they exist right now. I think in the long run, maybe 10 years from now, that won't matter. Because then we'll feel very confident. I do think self-driving cars at whatever point they become, I do think that human error is the number one cause of automobile accidents. I believe the Department of Transportation and whatever highway safety, whatever would back me up on that. So I think there's huge assets and huge gains. Will people die because the machines do something wrong? Absolutely, that will happen. But when you start from a utilitarian standpoint, like if you start talking about philosophy, it's like, well, if we have 10 deaths a year because the machines mess up versus 250,000 deaths on the roads, one of those is bigger than the other. Um, and what doesn't matter. I think it's going to take a lot of time for people to adapt and decide kind of where they're going to be comfortable with these things as we go forward.
Agreed. Agreed. So I'm
So,
I'm curious now that we're on. We've shot the first 9 holes. Going to the back nine. I had to do the math really quickly in my head.
mhm.
Talk to me about the intellectual property concerns. I mean, you would mention it with like the test of 4 plus X, where X is greater than or equal to 0,
Yeah.
and antitrust regulations. Just like I've done a little bit of research into it, but I try to make sure I don't fall into the trap of being like, well, I've done my research. I know everything.
So which part of the law do you want to talk about?
Oh man, intellectual property. So I'm curious your take on New York Times v OpenAI, where they have trained their large language model off of essentially text that is copywritten that they did not pay for. The ability for them to be able to, because like a lot of these models, they don't work well unless you have just a massive amount of
Yeah.
training data. And what happens when there's no more public use that you can go into? Like, you have to dive into things that are copywritten, and you're not paying these organizations for the privilege of using their content.
I have pretty strong feelings about this. Okay, so the case itself, I think they were negotiating at some point in time, right? And I believe the lawsuit is because the New York Times wants more money. And a lot of the case hinges upon Common Crawl, because Common Crawl is a set, you can actually get that. It's crawl the web. And the New York Times has articles that go back, to 1850. Now, those aren't protected by copyright law anymore, by the way. They're in what's called the public domain at this point. But but the Common Crawl is one of the major things cited in the case, is that the New York Times makes up X% of Common Crawl, or it's one of the top 3 in Common Crawl, et cetera, right? The weird thing is, I think it's going to be the story of the have and the have-nots. These large media companies, Reuters, I think, is inking some kind of agreement. All these other people are going to ink some kind of agreement or whatever it is, and they're going to get paid some amount of money, et cetera, right? And I think that the challenge with the New York Times article, the New York Times case in particular, was they said, hey, not a big deal, but we want more money. It's kind of what it came down to, because they were negotiating at some point last year. And the rumor is, from the rumor mill, is they were being offered somewhere low 7 figures. So call it $4 or $5 million, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And New York Times is like, oh, hell no. We're not going to give you access to our stuff forever for a one-time fee of 7 million. You made $1 billion last year on this, right? Et cetera, right? And it looks like they're heading towards 2 billion right now with like a bullet. Um, so that being said, they want a lot more money. So the LA Times is also in there. They're in Common
Mm-hmm.
Crawl. I think they're in the top 10. Chicago Tribune. I mean, it's like all these different things right in Common Crawl, right? So they all get a piece of the pie, right? And the rest of us just sit out in the wilderness and just hope that it's like when you get your class action lawsuit settlement, it's like you're entitled to 17
Yeah,
cents
yeah, yeah.
or 3 sticks of bubble gum, whichever one you prefer. And meanwhile, the big news meeting. By the way, don't get me wrong, I think the New York Times stuff is very valuable. So there's two main questions here. Number one, is the use of, so we're talking about copyright. So there's copyright, there's trademark. So when we talk about parts of trademark law, there's trade secrets. Okay. The Coca-Cola case is the classic case on that. They end up settling, so, because otherwise they're going to reveal their secret in court, or whatever it was. They're like, we trade secret is stuff you're keeping secret. And so for most software programmers, a lot of times we have copyrights in our code, right? Once it's put in a tangible format, we receive some copyright protections. They're not huge, but you can get copyright protections. You can get sued based on that, right? The problems with it is the devil's in the details. You have to have a lot of money. You have to get experts in there. You have to have experts who know what they're talking about. I don't know how many lawyers who do any programming at all. I mean, I probably know 7 total, and I probably know hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of attorneys. Um, so that being said, so when you're talking about the different things, you got trademark, copyright, patent, which the patent office just came out with some stuff last week saying that you could use AI, provided the invention is substantially the work of the individual. So they've said that you can use AI in patenting your inventions, which I think could be great, because a lot of patent law, which a lot of people don't know, is a lot of patent law is just procedural. it's pushing paper. It's people think you have to have this crazy engineer. Look, you do want people who know what they're about to make the arguments. But the reality is a lot of patent law is just procedural. And I'm not a patent attorney, by the way, but that's just one piece of that. So the big thing we're talking about is really copyright. It's really comes down to. There's been a couple of cases out there where I think the creativity machine is one of the cases, and you got the comic book case, by the way, too. The comic book case was like a graphic novel, and they said that some of the stuff, the text, if it was generated by AI, but the images, they were making this whole argument that their prompts had really done things. And then basically, the courts came down to is that according to the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which is where copyright is, at least the original, to protect inventions and creations of the people for a reasonable time, et cetera. I have to look at the exact text of it. But that being said, copyright's a big question. So the big question is not, are they infringing? It really has to do with, is it a fair use? And the weird thing about this is that fair use technically puts it beyond the reach of copyright law. This is one thing that's really hard to understand. Technically, if you've got fair use, you're allowed to infringe, and infringing is not even a question. Okay, if you've got fair use, it kind of puts it outside the realm of the infringement argument, right? So, and I don't think you have to look any further. There's a case dealing with, putting stuff in a RAM, et cetera. Like even a temporary housing of that stuff, a temporary copying is infringement. And there are these individual rights that adhere to the person who creates the stuff. So without making this all about the law and explaining all the details on it, I think ultimately there's a couple camps on this. Number one, and this is something you have to understand about the federal judges who are deciding this, because this really is it's all federal question. All copyright is federal, and in the United States, the judges tend to rule partly based on how they like the cases to come out. I know we don't want to say our judiciary is political, but if you use Google for a long time, remember the thumbnail image case, right?
Yes.
Okay, that ended up being fair use. Well, the judges, and even the scraping of all the books, the judges say, well, I kind of don't want this whole thing to go away. It's kind of important for us, et cetera. And that's kind of how these cases kind of come down. It really, really does. And I think there's some challenges in that, right? So I think ultimately you're not going to see the entire ecosystem. I would be highly surprised if the courts came out and said that what these machines did, you get injunctive release and they have to shut down, because there's really no way to pull this training data out of the models, right? And I've heard people say this, and I think those people have no idea what they're talking about. I've heard people come out and say, well, if they can figure out this, then they can figure. I don't think there's any way, unless you could reboot your machine back to where it was, 8 months ago, before it ingests this information, because it's been tokenized, it's been turned into number strings, it's been added in the whole mix. And you as a programmer, you understand that. As someone who's programming some of these machines and fine tuning them, there is no way to flip. I could literally take a backup of that machine of what it looked like March 3rd last year before I give it the fine tuning into other data. But there's no real way to pull it apart without fundamentally destroying the model that you've got. Okay. And I've heard people, even some very alleged experts in the AI field, say, oh, well, I'm sure they can find it. And no, there's no way to unbake this cake. So just take the flour out. It's not a big deal, right? And so I think the big thing is, I think the courts are ultimately going to decide that the transformers, even think about that, they named it GPT, general pre-trained transformer, right? Somebody thought about this. What should we call this thing we're making, Zach? Let's what would we want? In the long run, they're going to argue about any copy infringement. I know. Unless we can get transformative use, we should call it a transformer. I don't think that was by accident. I mean, maybe they came up with it, but it's one of the most astute naming conventions I've ever heard on anything. So I think the courts are probably going to rule that the use of it is transformative in nature. Okay. I think they're probably going to settle with everybody else. And it's hard to know what happened out there, but Sam and I know GPT-5 is probably around the corner. I mean, I don't know. I'd probably place money on it if it'd be first quarter, second quarter into first. I don't know yet. But we know they started working on it, last June, I think it was. And we know that GPT-4, which is funny, all the stuff, Gemini Ultra's out. It's as good as GPT-4. It's like, GPT-4 has been around since March last year. And we know they'd been working on it 7 months before that. So GPT-4 has existed in what does that put me at? August
Of
2021, 22,
2022.
2022, sorry,
Yeah.
2022. So that, okay, and you've got something as good at it now. Well, good job. You finally caught up to the rest of the class. So
Hmm.
I'm curious about where that's going to go. But I do think, from a legal standpoint, there are major things for people to think about. First of all, if you were actively infringing, your outputs are still going to be a problem. If you are telling it to generate, I don't know if you saw this, that apparently somebody figured out how to get GPT to regurgitate the token string it gets fed.
Yes.
Or thing.
Yes.
Have you seen that?
Yeah. It's pretty
Totally
cool.
awesome. Why? But it also means the machines are a lot more limited than we've been led to believe. Basically,
Hmm.
they're just preloading it with a token string that's 1,700 tokens before we even feed anything in the machine. That also seems really, really, I mean, considering that before we got these, I mean, a Gemini Ultra Pro or Gemini Pro, whatever it is today that came out has a 1 million token context window.
Hmm.
I got to test it. I have a hard time believing that that mushy middle is going to be anything other than garbage. But maybe, I don't know. Everybody does that. But the weirdest thing about all this stuff in the past year is that people have made these claims about the machines, and you go look at it and you're like, yeah, you just trained it on your one shots so it could answer them better than GPT-4. So,
Hmm.
and the leaderboards figured that out pretty quickly. So I think with all the stuff you're generating right now, number one, you've got to recognize, I think you probably should be sending through a copy scrape analysis afterwards. Anything you generate, we do that internally at our marketing agency. I haven't heard anybody talk about that. So you
Hmm.
just want to see if the stuff on the web already looks like what I've written. And if it
Right.
looks verbatim, I think you got a problem, because your generative outcomes are a major piece of that. And we've got our own copy scrape thing we've been building, because we have a way to do it and analyze it. I don't, it's not that I buy other people's software. I totally do. We don't just build all of our own things. But when it's really lacking, we'll go out and build these things in the market segment. And there's only 4 of us programmers here. But um, that being said, I think you should be running your stuff through copy scrape to see if it's been lifted wholly from something else, similarity, etc. If you go tell it to generate the next Harry Potter novel and you somehow get through the guardrails, that is not going to be fair use. You are
Hmm.
totally going to be lit up like the 4th of July when that comes out. But I think the Transformers, I think, and I don't know that that's the way it should be. I think it's outside the reach. The way our current law is written, I feel like there is a gap. And I've talked to Miriam at the copyright office, and they seem to think that the current copyright laws are broad enough to wrap themselves around this thing, and I don't know that they currently are. I think fundamentally it should make us feel a little icky that the entire knowledge of human history has been digested and regurgitated out, and it's generating something um, that's literally taking away from the creators in some ways. And I've heard people say it's going to make people more creative. But if you've wrote those novels and those books, I can ask it. I can query it stuff about your books without ever buying your novels, you know? And so that's, again, that's an output thing, right? That's an output question, right? I'm asking it. The model wasn't necessarily, that's what the model's designed to do. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if the courts open up Napster a little bit, right? Like,
Hmm.
well, no, I really think, because that may be a case that's relevant, because Napster knew what people were doing with the software and they ultimately attributed it to them. The question is, when you built these transformers originally beyond research, did you know that people were doing, your people were doing it now? And they are putting guardrails in there, so, opt out and those things. So I'm not sure. I do think the courts will probably say that it is transformative nature, the machines themselves. I don't think the genie's back in the bottle. And isn't it kind of a moot point now that you have all these open source models that are being released on the market? I mean, Llama 2 is decent. We use it for
Hmm.
commercial use. We use Llama 2. And I'll go ahead and say this: we use Llama 2 for stuff that the guardrails on GPT and Gemini and Anthropic won't let us do.
Hmm.
If I have it right, and so here's something I'm doing. I'm currently using AI to help write chapters of my books. Okay. But I'm doing it in a very different way than everybody else. I have my outline for my book chapters. I have my topics, I have my research materials, and then I am literally dictating in my chapters, my life stories, and everything else. And then I'm putting out through Easy Prompt, our own bot, because I know that it's private. Easy Prompter allows me to do it. I'm now feeding in those audio files and getting back it like a ghostwriter would, just basically and it's the same content basically. It's my creative content, but it's just been put in a different format, maybe where it doesn't jump around so much. I mean, if you've heard me talk in this podcast, I can tend to jump without a um without a direct line. So I'm using it in that way to make it, um, I believe, copyrightable, and I'll submit it on those bases. But I'm actually literally providing the outline, the book, and then I'm just dictating it to it. And it'd be I'm using it more like I'd use a ghostwriter. A ghostwriter takes all your hours of stuff and they edit it down in digestible format, right? And that's how I'm currently using, and it's an experiment. I'm trying to use it for that. That's how I'm using a lot of it right now. I'm having my people, like with blog articles, even they go do the research and then they're dictating some stuff and we're trying to rewrite it with that. And we found we've gotten a lot better outcomes than what it's coming up with on our own, because a lot of those things you're feeding into the machine, your own individual insights are not things that are coming out of the machine. And that's why you kind of get that the content's still real well written by GPT and Anthropic, et cetera. By the way, I don't know if you felt this way. We feel like if we're doing social media posts, social media drafts, we get a lot better responses. Easy Prompter does integrate with both our software, integrates with Anthropic, and so Claude 2. And I guess we'll have to integrate it with Gemini now whenever that API gets released for it. But that being said, when we do social media posts, we find the stuff on GPT, like everything on LinkedIn right now is GPT generated. I mean, nobody puts that many emojis in a post. I mean, come on, who are you kidding? Um,
Oh, I
but
do.
no,
100%.
no,
I'm in the minority. That's okay. I'll
no,
accept that.
God, man, you're killing me, Smalls. Um, but I have found that Anthropic gives you a lot more human-like content when you feed it right. That's what I've discovered. At least that's my own opinion. I haven't really done blind testing on that, but
Hmm.
that's kind of what we do. So when we're generating social content, we prefer Claude over ChatGPT. But that being said, I think there's a lot of questions here about the copyright issue. I do think we need a new law talking about it, and I think everything else that's funny about what's happened with all this stuff, like the deep fakes and everything else, like we
Hmm.
are. So right now, in our AI podcast, we have a three-dimensional rendered AI model that's powered by one of our large language machines. Um, it's not completely real time. Sometimes there's a 5 second lag when she says something, and we'll cut that out. It's not incredibly long. It's not like wait 3 minutes and she says something. So it's pretty good. But we are upgrading different pieces. So we've basically cobbled together what we consider the best of breed technology using different things. So her voice is one particular thing in the rendered three-dimensional model. So we will be putting a new model in. We're going to give her a facelift as far as that goes. But right now, the first thing we're going to do is a voice lift. And we're using Meta's. Meta has a new open source language model they've used. And I don't know if you've gotten to play with it. It's pretty cool. So we have that deployed a couple locally. But the thing we're using internally, just to kind of wrap a few of these things back together, is we're using that with a synthesized version of my voice for my own podcast. Not to remove the ums, but when you mess up a whole line or you just talk of yourself and something happens, we literally are feeding my voice into that, and then we're cutting that into the pod when we have a problem. So, and it's not like it's not more than maybe 5 seconds or something like that. But generally speaking, you can do that, and it looks pretty seamless. You can't tell. But we're doing that partly because I didn't want my voice being out there so I don't want someone else to model on my voice.
Yeah.
Um, I caught some crap. I said some stuff about HeyGen. I don't know if you've used HeyGen or whatever it
Mm-mm.
is. It's got
No.
a. I have if I cannot determine from your privacy policy in your terms of service whether or not you are taking my content, my assumption is you are. That you're using it to train your models or use my voice. When something in your privacy policy says anything that we shared within your platform, we can use with or without attribution for whatever purposes we so desire, that doesn't make me feel really warm and fuzzy.
Hmm.
So, and I think the big thing about it is I want people to read the terms of service. But back to the copyright issue, it'll be interesting to see how the courts come out on this. If we end up with a split circuit, which is like let's say the ninth out in California and the second up in New York say different things, it will head to the Supremes,
Hmm.
and then we'll have a Supreme Court case on that, which will then be the law of the land. I think ultimately we need Congress to act, but the only thing it looks like they had the will to act on was the terrible stuff that happened to Taylor Swift the other day.
Oh
Uh,
man.
but you know, that's been happening to high school kids for the past 2 years,
Oh.
and we have not taken action. And nothing. I think it'd be great if we can marshal all the Swifties to get us some law. But a couple of the laws they're talking about putting in the place right there are so far reaching, right? It could theoretically kill all parody comedy altogether.
Hmm.
So I'm really worried when we make a knee jerk reaction, which this should have been a thoughtful, considered thing that we should have said, man, this is happening to high school girls. We need to have a law to deal with this. We should be addressing this. We should have been addressing this back in 2020 when these cases started
Hmm.
popping up. And so all of a sudden now it's this rush to, and I think we're going to pass a law that I'm really concerned is going to overreach, and then we'll have a clawback. So I have questions about that. Copyright, though, my wife's a fine artist. We know that all the stuff she had posted to Deviant Art, she did some fantasy.
Oh
She was a
man,
published.
I
She was
forgot about DeviantArt. That's awesome.
she was a published fantasy artist years ago in the aughts, like 2002, 2003.
Awesome.
I worked for a games company a long time ago. I'm credited in a big MMO a big MMO. Um, I built one of the cities for it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I've done a lot of weird things, but she had posted her art there, and she found out like somebody had either Deviant Art or somebody had licensed everything in
Hmm.
there, and we were like, wait. So all of your stuff was just licensed, and you used this back in what 2004, 2005? And I think there are major questions there. I think we could be looking at the mother of all class action lawsuits at some point in time. But I think the big question is going to come out first is do they decide the models are fair use? And then is it who using it from there? And I do my big fears. I don't trust a lot of the large companies. And when they say, oops, that was in our terms of service, I don't believe them ever when they say that.
Hmm.
That went through a team of lawyers. You have an entire floor, two floors in downtown Manhattan of one of those large office towers that are just filled by lawyers. You're all smarter than me. And you're saying you didn't know, and I think it's a big problem. I think
Hmm.
it's a big problem. And I think
But
privacy is probably the big one.
it looks like you're actually in Midtown right now, facing the
Yeah.
Citicorp building. You're on
Yeah.
the south side of Central Square, if I remember right,
Yeah.
or Central
Well, this
Park.
is this is my New York backdrop. I have several
Okay.
other major cities. But I have been in some of these buildings downtown
Yeah,
in New York. I love New York. It's a great city. It really is.
yeah. I used to the one of my offices was just if you look at the Citicorp building, just
Hmm.
go about 40 floors down to the left, right across the
Got it.
courtyard.
See, I would
So,
look really special if I were up this high, right? Except the
no,
clouds should be moving more.
huh, David. All right, looking at my list, I think we covered everything I wanted to cover.
I
Where
hope
can
it was
people?
intelligible.
Oh yeah, no, 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 totally, totally. Where can people go to learn more about you, learn more about your companies? What are your podcasts? Like, if people want more David Maples, if they just can't stand it, like, where can they go?
Well, I do have davidmaples.com.
Okay.
That's for my keynote speaking addresses and things like that. I do that. The Catapult Creative Media is the digital marketing firm, and calre.com, Kalre.com is just our software division.
Hmm.
It's kind of it is a separate company, separate entity, but we kind of move stuff back and
Yep.
forth. The big podcasts are in KC, if you're in Kansas City watching this, the KC Leaders Podcast, just kcleaderspodcast.com. You can also find that on all these are on Spotify, Apple,
Hmm.
Google, wherever you listen to podcasts. I have my business podcast is the Buck Stops Here podcast. I've been doing that one. That one's kind of taken a backseat a little bit for a moment. It just requires a lot more time and energy to develop.
Hmm.
It has been suggested we take all that content and turn that into a book. So that's actually one thing I'm in
Mm.
discussions with some people on right now. And AI, the podcast, if you want to go meet Virginia, who runs Catapult along with me and is my wife, and you want to meet Kai, who is our fully rendered AI, she's sorry, it's I shouldn't anthropomorphize these
Yeah.
things, but Kai is our kind of purple skinned alien who's on the show with us. The interesting thing about mentally fencing with Kai is that if you fed her the recent articles, it's really, and I've been thinking about doing this. I had a big talk with a big law firm last week, and they were talking about training their attorneys for doing cross examinations and things like that using an
Mm.
AI. And I think there's some very interesting things on that because currently, if you're going to cross or preparing for a big case in court, you have another attorneys prepare the other side and then cross you. The challenge with it, it slows down everything because your side has already figured out all your information, et cetera. And what we were looking at is using an AI to at least be the preliminary cross examiner to help bolster your case. And so we thought that would be a very good use case for this kind of thing, et cetera. There's some interesting stuff out there. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, I know it's interesting stuff. Like, yeah, because you can train it on the facts of the case, you can give it facts that you don't know, and it can put together a pretty compelling argument.
No,
So,
I dig it, dude. It's been real. You've
yeah,
dropped some knowledge.
cool.
Appreciate it. Use Opera. I look at you differently now. You know, you're just I don't know if you were a Brave person, I don't know if you're an Opera person, but you know, Firefox. It is what it is. Thank you so much for the time, dude. I
Hey,
appreciate it.
thank you so much, Zach. It was a lot of fun.
And
Take care of
ladies and
yourself.
gentlemen, we'll catch you in the future.